Hello, and welcome to episode 13 of The Good Life. Today, we are going to be talking about boundaries. This is going to be a short, simple episode about boundaries. Guaranteed, we are going to continue to talk about boundaries because this is one of the topics that I talk about with people the most. I am at the end of a day at my mental health counseling private practice, and I have already had this conversation multiple times today. But there is something that I have been working on as far as my own personal boundaries, and it's been important to me. And as I have started to share it with friends and colleagues and just different people in my life, they are like, oh my gosh, Melissa, you need to do a presentation on this. You need to present at a conference about this or something like that. And I'm like, really, you guys? But it does have to do with boundaries. And I think I am hitting on something that a lot of people are like, this is so important, and I wish I could be doing this in my life too. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about boundaries. So we're not going to go into depth about boundaries today, but boundaries are essentially things that you do in your life to protect yourself, to protect your energy, to protect how you are treated. They are things that you do that just say, hey, this is what I'm going to have in my life. This is what I'm going to settle for in my life. This is how I'm going to allow people to treat me or not treat me. And they are things that you do to make sure that your needs are met and to take care of yourself. There are lots of different types of boundaries. You can have very rigid boundaries. You can have very porous or diffuse boundaries, and then you can have healthy boundaries. So we're not going to go into that. That is a huge part of my sleep program, though. There's a very big section on boundaries just because boundaries is so important. I work with people on boundaries every single day. When people start setting boundaries in their life, meaningful, intentional boundaries in their life, they start seeing really good results. They start having a big sense of pride, and they start living the kind of life that they actually want to be living instead of just the life that's hitting them and they are just accepting and not setting boundaries about. And when you start living a life that feels good, that feels like you, that's within your values, that's meaningful, that is what you truly want, you will start to sleep a lot better, because a lot of the times boundaries are a huge issue with sleep. So I'm going to tell a little story about myself as we talk about boundaries. Like I said, this is probably going to be the first of many episodes about boundaries. I have had a long career. I have been a therapist for 18 plus years. Before that, I was a correctional officer. So my first job out of undergrad, I was working for our local community sheriff's department. I worked for them for 7 years. After that, I started working for another really big system in my community. It was a school district. I was a school counselor for 1 decade, so for 10 years. I also did evening work in a clinical mental health counseling center. I did summer work at drug and alcohol treatment centers, clinical mental health treatment centers. I always had 2 jobs, sometimes more. I was busy and I was working in really big systems. And you guys probably know, because a lot of us work in big to medium systems. When we work in those systems, we are an employee in those systems. And so we don't get to set work boundaries. We work the hours that we need to. Sometimes we have great schedules. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we have amazing coworkers and bosses. Sometimes we don't. But I worked in very big systems. I took a little pivot and I started to do some coaching for the first time ever. Coaching. I was doing personal training and nutrition coaching. That was awesome. That was also in a system. After that, I decided that I was going to start a private practice. And so I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. And then a year ago, I decided that I was going to build this coaching program specializing in sleep, because so many of my clients were struggling with sleep. So many were struggling with sleep. Even when I was a school counselor, children, adolescents were struggling with sleep. So it is something that I know is a foundational habit. It is a foundational thing. And when you improve sleep, everything else improves. So that's kind of my story. And so I ended up working in these systems where I really didn't have a lot of freedom. I was an employee. I had to do what my employer said, period. And so when I started my private practice, when I opened my group coaching program, when I started building that and really promoting that about a year ago, I decided, and that was a big build year. I was working, honestly, probably minimum 60 hours a week, every day in some capacity. Still, when you work for yourself, you work pretty much every day in some capacity doing something, even if it's not a ton of work. But I was building. So I have had a very busy year. When we talk about being at capacity, which I know I have talked about in the podcast, I was either at capacity and sometimes slightly above, sometimes below. I was pushing my limits, but I knew that eventually I was going to set some boundaries and I've been planning them for like a year. And last week I implemented them. So I now have a schedule that is not crazy, that is not like so many hours of work every single day. I was crazy intentional about it. I planned it. I thought about all the different things. And then last week I was actually able to implement it. There was a transition period, like the end of the school year in my private practice, because I work with a lot of parents and a lot of adolescents. And I was like, this is just a time where I can build the schedule that fits my life, that fits my energy. I get up super early in the morning. You guys, I think, know that. I get up before 5 a.m. I work out every single morning that I see clients. I do not need to be a person working till 5, 6, 7, 8 at night. Okay, I go to bed early. I get good sleep. You know that. I get good sleep. And so I actually set this up. And so I am building fun. I am building community. I am building a schedule that aligns with my energy for the first time in my life, because I have been able to do this. And I know it's a privilege. And I have been working professionally for over 20 years. I've been a counselor for over 18. A big part of this is being able to work for myself. But as I start talking to people about this, they're like, oh my gosh, Melissa, I never thought about like figuring out my energy level and figuring out how I feel at certain times of the day, and then setting up certain things at certain times of the day so that I feel really good during that time, and I don't work above my capacity, and I don't see people outside of the time that feels really good for me. And they're like, this is amazing. You need to talk about it. So I decided to pop in and do a little episode about this. I wanted to share this story because for a long time, I tried to have boundaries. I tried to set boundaries. I did set boundaries, but there were so many factors that were at play that I couldn't truly set those boundaries. And they're still there. Like, I have a full-time private practice. I have a group coaching program. You guys are my clients. Maybe not those of you who are listening to the podcast, but maybe some of you are. Like, I serve my clients. And so, yes, you guys help me to have boundaries to set up my day so that I am taking care of you. But being able to do this has been life-changing. The last couple of weeks, I'm just like walking around like on a cloud. I'm like, it feels so good. And my days look different. I know not everybody likes to get up before 5 a.m. and hit the gym and then start work early. I know not everybody is working for themselves. I know people have other obligations, or they like to sleep in, or they have children and they need to go do things later in the day. But you can start thinking about your life as what is going to best serve me, what is going to make me feel good, what is going to be better for my nervous system, what is going to align with my energy so that I am not working times where I'm exhausted and I am not doing my best and I am depleted. You guys can start thinking about that. Maybe you can't overhaul every single part of your schedule, but you can start looking at your life and thinking, where do I need a different boundary? Where does something need to change because it is truly not working for me? Sleep boundaries are huge. Getting up at the same time every day, no matter what. Cutting down on your drinking, limiting your caffeine, getting up in the morning and having early morning sunlight, prioritizing your sleep. Those are examples of a sleep boundary. You can do things like that. You can consider like what my day looks like and what I can do about that. There are a lot of things that you can do to start setting boundaries, and you can start small, and it can be a tiny little boundary. Yeah, when I was working for somebody else, when I was working in big systems with thousands of people where I was just like a tiny one peg on the system, of course I couldn't make my own schedule, but I could make choices that helped me throughout the day. I could bring my food to work. I could take a break away from my desk a couple of times a day to just relax. I could leave work at the end of the day and just say, hey, work's over. I'm going home to focus on my family. So those are the kind of things that you can start doing that is going to help you start living a life that feels good, live a life that aligns with your energy, and that allows you to sleep well. I just wanted to share that story because the feedback I've been getting from people is kind of surprising me, that they're like, oh my gosh, you need to talk about this. So here I am talking about it. But one other thing I want to tell you, a really big cue that you need to consider setting a boundary or set a boundary in a certain area of your life is going to be the way that you feel. So the way that you feel when there is probably a need for a boundary is a variety of feelings, but it is resentful, angry, taken advantage of, depleted, things like that. So if you examine your life and you're thinking like, where am I feeling angry? Where am I feeling resentful? Where am I feeling taken advantage of? And just really not good, start focusing in those areas and start looking for even the smallest little thing that you can do to start setting a boundary, even if it's an internal boundary, even if it's like, I really hate doing this thing. Maybe you can change your mindset. Maybe it's not something that you need to overhaul your schedule or you need to convince somebody to treat you a different way. Maybe it can be an internal boundary that you start setting and you start following and you start doing that enough and your life will improve. You will start living a life that feels good. And when you live a life that feels good, you start to sleep well. That's what this podcast is all about. This is about sleep. If you want to deep dive into sleep, join my program, join the self-study, join the 8-week, join the VIP. But this podcast is about learning to live a life that allows you to sleep well. So thanks for listening. I will see you guys next week.